Why does a case that is now really more than 36 years old matter?
Because somebody died, and no matter what, ultimately that's our job, to find the truth.
When you talk to us, everything fit, makes more sense of what happened, and is corroborated by other people.
A Hollywood legend, a famous husband, a rising co-star. 3 people boarded a luxury yacht on a stormy November night in 1981. By morning, only 2 walked away alive. For 40 years, the world was told it was a tragic accident. But one witness knew the real story. And when he finally broke his silence, everything investigators believed shattered overnight. This is the truth nobody wanted you to hear. It was supposed to be a celebration. Thanksgiving had just ended. The turkey was eaten. The family gatherings were over. And Hollywood power couple Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood wanted nothing more than a quiet weekend on the water. So on Friday, November 27, 1981, 3 people stepped aboard a gleaming 60-foot yacht called the Splendour. Natalie Wood was 43 years old and glowing. She had just landed the role of a lifetime in a science fiction thriller called Brainstorm. After years of stepping back from Hollywood to raise her 2 daughters, she was finally coming back. The cameras loved her again. The studios were calling. This was supposed to be her grand return. Standing beside her was her husband, Robert Wagner. 51 years old, silver-haired, one of the most recognizable faces in American television. He was charming, polished, and deeply protective of his wife. At least, that is what the public saw. And then there was the third guest, Christopher Walken. 38 years old, intense, quiet, the kind of actor who could walk into a room and make everyone feel slightly uneasy without saying a single word. He was Natalie's co-star in Brainstorm. They had been filming together in North Carolina for weeks, and by all accounts, they had developed a warm, genuine friendship. The plan was simple: sail out to Santa Catalina Island, anchor in a quiet cove, drink some wine, and enjoy the ocean air. A peaceful escape from the noise of Los Angeles. The yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, had worked for Wagner and Wood for years. He knew the couple well. He knew their moods, their habits, their routines. And as he steered the Splendour away from the California coast that Friday evening, everything felt perfectly normal. But normal does not last long when 3 complicated lives are trapped on a 60-foot boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. By Saturday afternoon, the yacht was anchored at Isthmus Cove, a sheltered bay on the island's western shore. The water was calm. The sky was clear. If you had been watching from the beach, you would have seen a picture-perfect Hollywood weekend. But inside that boat, something was already shifting. Tensions that had been building quietly for weeks were about to explode. And the trigger was not the ocean. It was not the weather. It was something far more dangerous. Jealousy. 3 people. 1 boat. And a tension that was about to snap. If you were trapped on a small yacht with 2 people growing angrier by the hour, what would you do? Would you try to calm things down? Or would you lock your cabin door and pray the night passes quickly? Drop your answer in the comments, because the choice one person made that night may have changed everything. Nobody on that boat knew it yet, but they were living through their last normal hours together. And the clock was already ticking. Saturday evening started with laughter, but it was the kind of laughter that comes with a warning. Around 4 in the afternoon, Natalie, Robert, and Christopher climbed into the yacht's small rubber dinghy, named the Valiant. Captain Davern drove them ashore to the island's only real hotspot, Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant. They ordered drinks, then another round, and another. Witnesses sitting nearby watched the famous trio all evening. To an outsider, they looked like movie stars having the time of their lives. But as the alcohol flowed, the smiles began to freeze. Natalie and Christopher were sitting close, laughing about jokes from the movie set and passionately debating the art of acting. Robert Wagner sat watching them, quiet, rigid. The charm was disappearing from his face with every passing minute. The staff at the restaurant grew worried. The group was consuming massive amounts of wine and hard liquor. By 10 that night, the restaurant manager even called the harbor patrol, concerned that the trio was too drunk to safely navigate the dark water back to the boat. Yet, they made it back to the Splendour. And that is when the real nightmare began. The moment the salon doors clicked shut behind them, the small cabin became a pressure cooker. There was nowhere to run. No fresh air. Just 3 people, endless bottles of wine, and days of unspoken anger waiting to detonate. Christopher Walken began talking passionately about Natalie's career. He told her she was one of the greatest talents in Hollywood. He said she needed to stop staying home and fully throw herself back into making movies. To Robert Wagner, those words were not advice. They were an insult. Wagner saw it as Walken telling his wife that her family and her marriage were holding her back. The argument exploded instantly. Voices bounced off the wooden walls of the tiny room. Screaming replaced conversation. The debate over acting turned deeply personal. Wagner was furious. He felt Walken was stepping into his private marriage. Walken stood his ground, refusing to back down. Then came the sound that silenced the entire boat. Robert Wagner grabbed a bottle of expensive wine, raised it into the air, and smashed it across the coffee table. Glass shattered in all directions. Red wine splattered across the floor like blood. Natalie stood up. She looked at her husband. Her eyes were filled with anger, shock, and disgust. Without saying a single word, she turned her back on both men, walked down the narrow hallway, and slammed the door of the master stateroom. The room went dead silent. Christopher Walken, exhausted and uncomfortable, said goodnight and walked to his own guest cabin at the front of the boat. He closed his door, turned off the light, and went to bed. It was roughly 11 o'clock. Wagner was left alone in the main cabin, surrounded by shattered glass and broken silence. The fight seemed to be over. But what nobody knew was that the most terrifying part of the night was just about to unfold out on the pitch-black deck. The Pacific Ocean off Catalina Island in late November is pitch-black, freezing, and merciless. Outside the boat, the wind was picking up. Heavy rain began hitting the deck, and cold ocean waves rocked the 60-foot yacht violently back and forth. Inside the master stateroom, the bed was completely empty. Sometime after midnight, Robert Wagner walked down the hallway to check on his wife. He opened the bedroom door, but Natalie was not there. He checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked the main salon. Nobody. He stepped out onto the wet, slippery deck into the freezing wind. He walked to the back of the boat and looked over the stern. The small rubber dinghy, the Valiant, was gone. Its rope was untied. The initial thought seemed simple. Natalie had untied the dinghy and driven herself back ashore to Isthmus Cove to get away from the yelling, the drinking, and the anger. It made sense on the surface. But there was one massive, chilling detail that made this explanation almost impossible. Natalie Wood had a lifelong, crippling terror of deep, dark water. Since childhood, her mother had drilled a dark superstition into her head, warning her that dark water would take her life. Natalie was so deeply terrified of the ocean that she refused to submerge her head in water. She hated being on boats. She would not even step foot near deep pools without someone holding her hand. The idea that Natalie would voluntarily step out into a freezing rainstorm, in total darkness, climb down a slick metal ladder, and drive a tiny rubber dinghy across choppy ocean waves alone was completely unthinkable to anyone who actually knew her. Yet, as the minutes turned into hours, nobody hit the panic button. 1 in the morning passed. 2 in the morning passed. 3 in the morning passed. The boat stayed quiet in the dark. If you enjoy discovering the hidden truths behind Hollywood's biggest mysteries, make sure to subscribe right now, because what happened when the sun came up changed everything investigators thought they knew. Finally, just before 4 in the morning, an emergency distress call was broadcast over the marine radio. Searchlights cut through the heavy morning fog. Harbor patrol vessels sliced through the dark water. Helicopters began scanning the jagged coastline of Catalina Island. At 7:44 a.m. on Sunday, November 29th, the search came to a horrifying end. Roughly 1 mile away from the Splendour, search teams spotted a patch of bright color bobbing in the gray morning surf. It was Natalie Wood. She was floating face down in the freezing ocean. She was wearing a nightgown, a flannel shirt, blue socks, and a heavy red down jacket. Not far away, the rubber dinghy was found bouncing gently against the rocky shore. Its engine was switched off. The key was still in the ignition. Hollywood's brightest leading lady was gone at just 43 years old. The world was told it was a tragic midnight accident. But as the coroner looked closely at Natalie's body, the official story immediately began to fall apart. In the hours after Natalie Wood's body was pulled from the cold sea, the world wanted simple answers. The media was screaming for explanations. Tabloids printed wild rumors. Everyone was asking the exact same question. How could a legendary superstar, surrounded by people who loved her, simply vanish off a luxury yacht and drown alone? The police needed someone they could trust. And that person was Christopher Walken. Walken was visibly heartbroken, pale, and quiet. When investigators sat down with him, he did not dodge questions or hide behind lawyers. He gave them a calm, direct, and straightforward timeline of what he witnessed. He admitted there had been a heated argument in the salon about acting and life. But he insisted the fight was strictly professional and that it was completely over before he walked away. He told detectives that he went straight to his private cabin, shut the door, and fell fast asleep. He never saw Natalie walk out onto the deck. He never heard a splash. He never heard anyone scream for help. With the heavy rain drumming against the roof and the ocean crashing against the hull, he simply heard nothing. Years later, in a rare interview, Walken shared his own theory about what happened out on that dark water. He believed it was a freak, tragic accident. According to Walken, the small rubber dinghy had been bouncing loudly against the side of the yacht due to the rough waves, making a repetitive banging sound that would have kept Natalie awake. Annoyed and exhausted, she likely stepped outside in the freezing rain to tighten the ropes. Wearing smooth slippers on a slick fiberglass deck, she probably lost her footing, slipped, hit her head against the boat, and fell straight into the icy ocean. Once in the water, her heavy red down jacket would have soaked up water like a giant sponge. It became an anchor. It dragged her down, making it impossible for her to climb back into the dinghy or swim to safety. It was a neat, logical, and heartbreaking explanation. The Los Angeles County coroner, known across Hollywood as the coroner to the stars, reviewed the evidence. Natalie's blood alcohol level was high, and trace amounts of motion sickness medication were in her system. The official ruling was swiftly delivered: accidental drowning. Case closed. The entire investigation wrapped up in less than 2 weeks. Christopher Walken packed his bags and went back to work. Robert Wagner returned to his mourning family. Natalie Wood was buried in a quiet cemetery in Los Angeles. Hollywood accepted the story. The world moved on. For nearly 30 years, that accidental slip was the official truth written in stone. But hidden beneath the surface of that quiet agreement was a terrifying secret. The man who drove the boat that night had lied to the police. And when his guilt finally became too heavy to carry, the entire story would come crashing down. For nearly 3 decades, the truth stayed locked inside one man's conscience. His name was Dennis Davern. In 1981, he was the young boat captain hired to run the Splendour. He was right there when the wine bottle shattered. He was right there when the screams echoed across the water. And for 29 years, he carried a crushing secret that slowly tore his life apart. Everyone faces moments when fear makes it hard to do the right thing. You might know what it feels like to stay quiet when you should have spoken up, or to feel completely powerless against people with more influence than you. We all carry moments of regret, but Dennis Davern's silence weighed heavier than most. In November 2011, just weeks before the 30th anniversary of Natalie's death, Davern finally decided he could not stay quiet any longer. He walked into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, sat down in front of cold case detectives, and admitted something shocking.
He had lied in 1981.
Davern confessed that he had protected Robert Wagner out of deep loyalty, fear, and immense pressure from high-powered Hollywood lawyers. But now he wanted the real story on the official record. His new testimony painted a terrifying picture of what really happened on that boat. According to Davern, the argument in the salon did not just end quietly when Walken went to bed. Instead, the fight spilled out through the salon doors and onto the rear open deck of the yacht. Davern stated that he stood inside the wheelhouse and clearly heard Robert Wagner screaming furiously at Natalie near the stern of the boat. The shouting grew louder and more aggressive. Davern became so alarmed that he stepped out onto the deck to try and calm things down. But Wagner turned on him immediately, ordering him in pure anger to back off, stay out of it, and mind his own business. Davern retreated inside. Minutes later, the yelling suddenly stopped. A heavy, unnatural silence fell over the Splendour. Davern walked back outside to check on the couple. Wagner was standing by the railing, alone. Natalie was nowhere to be seen. When Davern realized she was missing, he immediately reached for the yacht's powerful floodlights to search the black water. But according to the captain, Wagner ordered him not to turn them on. Davern then begged to radio the Coast Guard immediately. Wagner refused again. Instead, Wagner allegedly poured himself a drink and told the captain to wait, claiming they should look around the boat themselves and avoid creating a public scandal. For nearly 4 critical hours, while Natalie Wood was floating somewhere in the freezing Pacific, no rescue call was made. These shocking claims turned Hollywood upside down. Homicide detectives immediately reopened the investigation. But Dennis Davern's words were only the beginning. When forensic pathologists opened Natalie Wood's old medical files and looked at the photographs of her body, they discovered something the first investigation had completely ignored. Words can be changed. Memories can fade. People can lie. But physical evidence does not forget. In 2012, following Captain Davern's stunning confession, the Los Angeles County Chief Medical Examiner assembled a team of top forensic pathologists. They pulled the original yellowing autopsy files, microscopic tissue slides, and high-resolution photographs taken on the morning Natalie's body was recovered. What they uncovered destroyed the official accident story once and for all. Back in 1981, the original coroner had noted bruises across Natalie's body, assuming she received them when she hit the boat during her fall or bounced against rocks in the surf. The new forensic team looked closer, and what they discovered sent chills through the department. Natalie had fresh, severe bruising along her forearms, her wrists, and the curve of her left shoulder. She had deep scratch marks along her neck and abrasions across her forehead and cheek. Forensic science proved something critical. These injuries happened before Natalie entered the freezing ocean. Her heart was still beating strongly when those bruises formed. Even more troubling, the pattern of the bruises told a dark story. The marks on her arms were not consistent with scraping against the rough fiberglass hull of a boat. Instead, they looked like direct grab marks, consistent with someone gripping her tightly or a violent struggle taking place before she went over the railing. Furthermore, there was no massive skull fracture. If she had slipped, knocked herself unconscious on the side of the boat, and fallen into the sea, there would have been severe, deep bone trauma. That trauma simply was not there. Then came the psychological evidence. Ocean safety experts re-examined the weather conditions from that night. The Pacific was freezing. The waves were 3 to 5 feet high, the rain was relentless, and the water was pitch black. Why would a woman who is deathly terrified of dark water voluntarily step outside in her nightgown, untie a heavy rubber dinghy, and attempt to navigate a stormy ocean all by herself? It defied every basic instinct of human psychology. In June 2012, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner made an unprecedented move. They officially issued an amended autopsy report. The word accidental was permanently struck from Natalie Wood's death certificate. Her official cause of death was formally altered to drowning and other undetermined factors. The medical examiner explicitly added a chilling sentence to the public record. The non-fatal injuries found on her body could not be definitively explained, and the possibility of foul play could not be ruled out. In an instant, 30 years of history changed. Natalie Wood was no longer the victim of a careless midnight accident. Her death was now officially classified as suspicious. And cold case homicide detectives immediately turned their attention to the last person who saw her alive on that deck. In February 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department held a press conference that sent shockwaves around the globe. After years of reinvestigation, cold case detectives publicly named Robert Wagner as an official person of interest in the death of his wife. Detectives revealed that over the decades, Wagner had changed his story multiple times. The timeline simply did not add up. Why did he wait nearly 4 hours to call the Coast Guard? Why did he claim Natalie was already asleep in bed when the boat captain saw them fighting near the back railing? Investigators repeatedly asked Wagner to sit down for a formal, recorded interview. Through his high-powered defense attorneys, Wagner firmly refused, stating that he had already answered every question back in 1981. In stark contrast, Christopher Walken standing in the investigation remained completely clean. Detectives made it clear to the public, Walken was never a suspect. His account of going to his cabin before the final argument on deck had remained rock solid for over 40 years. He was cleared of any wrongdoing. Walken chose not to write sensational tell-all books or give dramatic interviews. Instead, he honored his friend's memory with quiet dignity and let his decades of brilliant acting speak for itself. Today, the case of Natalie Wood sits in a heartbreaking legal limbo. Because her death is officially classified as suspicious, the file remains open on the desks of homicide detectives. There is no statute of limitations on murder. If new evidence or a direct confession ever surfaces, charges can be filed immediately. Yet, as the years slip away, the ocean keeps its secrets. Key witnesses have passed away. Physical evidence from 1981 has degraded. Without a confession, the final minutes of Natalie Wood's life may remain lost forever in the dark waters off Santa Catalina Island. Natalie Wood was more than just a headline or a mystery. She was a courageous, brilliant artist who fought for her independence in a ruthless Hollywood studio system. She gave the world unforgettable cinematic masterworks like West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a star whose light should have burned bright for decades longer. Her final night was tragic, but her true legacy will always belong to the screen. But this is not the only celebrity story where fame and success came with a hidden, dangerous cost. In our next documentary, we reveal the shocking journey of another Hollywood icon whose glittering life masked a battle nobody saw coming. Make sure to watch it right now on your screen.